Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye in Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, mutinying soldiers in Ivory Coast clear out from city streets after having accepted a deal to end their protest over an outstanding payoff from the government. Also, aid workers say that an appeal for funds to tackle Africa's biggest refugee crisis has fallen far short of what's needed. $1.2 billion is the target needed to help the millions fleeing South Sudan's 3-year civil war. And 20 years on since the vainglorious leader of DR Congo, then known as Zaire, was forced from power, we take a look back at Mobutu's notorious reign. But first, mutinying soldiers in the Ivorian city of Bouake cleared out from the streets on Tuesday after having accepted a deal to end their protest over an outstanding payoff from the government. At least 3 people have been killed in unrest that began last Friday when a group of soldiers launched their second uprising of the year over pay and living conditions. Now, most of the mutineers are former rebels who'd fought in support of President Alassane Ouattara during a post-electoral crisis at the end of 2010. They were later incorporated into the National Army, but have been demanding bonuses that had been promised to them. Sean Lingus is in Abidjan. He brings us the latest. Sean, so negotiations seem to have worked with the soldiers, but as far as you know, was the government ever seriously considering using force to put down the mutiny?
The government certainly wanted to have a show of force, at least the possibility of force out there by sending a military convoy outside of Bouake before launching negotiations. And the whole public line from the government leading up to the resolution of the crisis was that we are not negotiating. They're taking a firmer stance than they did in January. That said, they ended up negotiating and coming to the table. It again demonstrated the power that the mutineers have to bring the government to the negotiating table by the barrel of the gun. And we'll see if this accord holds. Certainly, Ivorians are tired of the unrest. They want the economy and the political stability that comes with it to be functioning at full tilt, and that can't happen when you have thousands of mutineers shooting in the air.
So the latest unrest was the second wave of the year. Throughout it all, actually, though, we have seen friction between different factions of the former rebel soldiers in terms of what they want. Is there a sense that this time round there's a general agreement over what they want and their willingness to stand down?
There seems to be some cohesiveness forming around the agreement. Initially last night, as soon as the defense minister went on state television to announce an agreement, there were reports that the agreement had already been rejected by some mutineers. That appears to have died down a bit today. I spoke with a mutiny spokesperson earlier today. He was in Bouake, and he said there are still some disagreements among the mutineers on the accord, but he expressed hope that through an awareness campaign among the group, that they'll be able to rally around the agreement. Part of the problem is it's a leaderless group, and it's got factions within factions. So time will tell, but this has been the Achilles heel of the Ivorian state right now, is that this factionalized military, and there are many different groups within it, and this is just one small group of many that make up the Ivorian armed forces.
Thanks very much. Sean Lingus there for us in Abidjan. Well, aid workers say that an appeal for funds to help tackle Africa's biggest refugee crisis has fallen far short of the $1.2 billion target. Almost 2 million people have fled South Sudan during the country's 3-year civil war. The exodus has also sparked famine. The UN Refugee Agency and the World Food Programme have warned of the scale of suffering that will follow if the world looks away.
We're facing the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. In today's environment, where we've got more fluid wealth than any time period in the history of the world, and to be facing the famines and the crises that are primarily man-made is inexcusable and unacceptable.
Well, many South Sudanese refugees have fled into neighbouring Kenya, Sudan, Ethiopia and Uganda. That's where Jane Flanagan is. She joins us now. Jane, the message from the UNHCR is that the situation many South Sudanese who've left their homes behind face is pretty dire. You've been to refugee camps in Uganda. What was your impression of the conditions?
Well, I've just come back from Bidi Bidi, which is the largest refugee settlement in Uganda, and it is bleak. Just over a year ago, there was very little in this area apart from a few villages with Ugandan communities. And today it's home to 270,000 South Sudanese refugees. Most of them are children. I saw a lot of children with not much to do. I saw a lot of adults hanging around, constructing some shelters, and not much in the way to keep them busy. I spoke to a lot of young girls who said, yes, they've left the fighting behind at home, but they're still facing a lot of dangers. They're worried about gangs of boys who roam around. It's at night, there's no electricity, there's no lighting. When people are going to the bathroom, they fear violence. There are plenty of dangers around them. I sat in on an absolutely heartbreaking therapy session with a 14-year-old girl. The humanitarian actors here are desperately trying to deal with some of the trauma that these refugees, especially the young ones, are coming with. And this girl had been separated from her parents in the chaos of fleeing South Sudan, and she, of course, was worried that she may never see them again. She spoke about the nightmares she's suffering, the fear she has, the absolute sense of hopelessness and suicidal feelings. Uganda is taking in a lot of refugees. It's going to take in a lot more. But what they've left behind was bad, but what they've come to is still a very, very bleak picture for them.
So you're saying that Uganda and undoubtedly other countries in the region will keep on taking in refugees from South Sudan. But will they be able to cope with the growing number of people fleeing violence?
Well, if present rates of arrivals continue and Uganda is getting over 2,000 people at its border every single day, it is predicted that Uganda will have 1 million refugees or more by the end of 2017. And Uganda has a very unique policy towards refugees. It doesn't believe in the camps, the refugee camps that we're familiar with seeing pictures on the television. Uganda welcomes refugees and gives refugees land. It settles them in existing communities. They may be in remote places, but Ugandans are already living there. The refugees are given land so they can grow crops. They're allowed to move freely around. They can set up businesses. They really are given a very unique access to the country, and refugees born in Uganda are given nationality. But I've spoken to a lot of people here who are concerned about the sheer numbers arriving and worry about the very real possibility of conflict ahead between the new arrivals and the Ugandans they are settling among. Because while the refugees are getting an awful lot of help to rebuild their lives, to have food aid, the Ugandans they are living among are getting none of that help at all, and some of the incidents of malnourishment in children here are presenting more commonly among the Ugandans than the refugees. So I think this is a case that's definitely going to need close watching, and if the rates of arrivals continue as they are, it's hard to see how there won't be some resentment or conflict between the two communities who are now settling together.
Thanks very much. Jane Flanagan there for us in Kampala. Well, 2 people were killed and several others injured in a northeastern Nigerian village after a trio of female suicide bombers detonated their explosives in the midst of the community. The attackers, who targeted the Shiwuri Buri village, are believed to have been sent by Boko Haram extremists. They'd told locals that they were travellers and had asked for accommodation before being turned away because of security concerns. Well, finally, 20 years ago on Tuesday, Mobutu Sese Seko, the military dictator of DR Congo, then called Zaire, fled the capital as rebels entered the city. His flamboyant and violent leadership lasted 3 decades. We now take a look back at his legacy.
Mobutu Sese Seko was born into a modest family in 1930. He rose to become one of Congo's most famous leaders. He started out as a journalist. When he was only 30, he joined the government of Patrice Lumumba, the independence hero. But then Mobutu, backed by the CIA and the former colonizer Belgium, turned against Lumumba, who was murdered. In 1965, Mobutu seized power and remained president for 32 years. Initially, he was popular.
In 1965, he told the Congolese people, "You are worthy people, you are no longer slaves. This land belongs to you. It is our country." In 1974, Congo made world headlines when Mobutu organized a boxing match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman in Kinshasa, the famous Rumble in the Jungle. But from early on, his regime brutally repressed the opposition, and corruption was widespread. Asked about his wealth, he responded rather nonchalantly.
Some say that my fortune is worth double the national debt, but I say prove it.
On the 16th of May 1997, he fled Kinshasa as the rebel troops of Laurent-Désiré Kabila entered the city. Mobutu went to Morocco. He did not live long outside of his presidential palace. Mobutu died on the 7th of September 1997, just 4 months after his downfall.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Take care.